Hi, this is Privateer Station, and today we'll bring you day 514 of Putin's invasion into Ukraine. As always, with former advisor to the office of the President of Ukraine, Lieutenant Colonel Olexiy Arestovych, and Russian opposition politician, lawyer, and blogger Mark Feygin. Today, thanks go to our members, Mormule, Vadim Cherdak, and PSH, and of course, big thanks to Bill and Andrei for your super thanks. And with this, let's deep dive into day 514. Dear friends, glad to see you all on Feygin Live. It is Saturday, July 22nd. Time is 5 minutes past 10 in Kiev, same time in Moscow. I apologize for technical delay here. Nothing we could do about it, sorry. Day 514 with Olexiy Arestovych. Glad to see you, Olexiy. Good evening, everybody. 61,000 and a half starting with us today. And I know my usual ask, because you probably are bored with me, but this is important to continue sharing links in your social media and clicking the like button, and do not forget to subscribe. All of you who are here, just click that button if you have not done that yet. To Feygin Live, to Olexiy Arestovych, and to the Privateer Station if you are listening or watching that in English. Alright, let's start our discussion. One can have different opinions about that, but we can start with the news about Girkin. And not that he is interesting for us, but I think we even actually asked him to come out to our stream. I think you suggested that at one of the streams for him to come out here. And we said that it's not an issue for us to bring him out to the stream and discuss. And he said, no, I'm not talking to scum like you. But they did arrest him yesterday. And I think this may be still the fallout of the 24th of July to Prigozhin's mutiny. That could be a slow reaction of the system to the danger from the right, who are more ultra than the power itself. So, like fascists of the fascists. And Girkin, regardless, is a rather symbolic figure. He's a FSB colonel, ex-colonel, but he's been involved in Ukraine conflict with Russia for a long time. So what do you think what's going to happen? I don't know, Mark. I don't know. How would you gauge that action that he's being arrested? I think they're tightening the bolts there because things are falling apart. So I think symbolic meaning of that is that they basically diagnosed themselves the next stage of their system falling apart, when they need to put behind bars even persons like Girkin, who that warrants repressing voices like that, the ultra-patriotic, so to say, voices. And some people are pointing fingers, saying that he had some name-calling towards Putin in one of his tweets, but I don't think this is exactly the reason. He'd done that before. I think they finally concluded that, or that there are certain discussions that perhaps his voice is finally organizing some people, or perhaps they're just tightening the ultra-right because they want to make it easier for them to pick the middle scenario. What do you think that would be? For example, some negotiation in the future. Right, because the right, the ultra-right, will be screaming in Russia that this is treason and they don't need that. So they could be hiding them for that purpose. Perhaps they're planning to have some peace negotiations in the future. Why are they starting so early? It's a big question. But I think everything they do seems like an attempt to escalate everything in order to play it down or trade it for something in the possible negotiations. That includes nukes in Belarus and moving Wagner to Belarus, and some statements about Poland, naval blockade of Ukraine. That all looks like raising the bar to try to sell it for more later. And I think Girkin's arrest and the others in his cohort actually fits that hypothesis pretty well. I don't mean to say that nothing else can be true, but it does fit into that line of thinking. All right, so you think perhaps he had some connections with Donbass, with maybe mutiny, or with some group that was voicing their discontent with Putin, or it's just their own motions. I think they might not need the ultra radical voice, and they might still be looking for spies or people who might cause additional mutiny later. So, some sort of the March for Justice #2. So, I think Kochkov, the ex general, got arrested and got smashed, and then there are some voices saying that all the hyper patriots will be arrested and prosecuted. Yeah, we can call them hyper patriots or hypertonics, but yeah, we'll see how the Russian authorities will act in the future, because they're masking their actions somewhat, but you can deduce the vector. And I think with a little bit more time having passed, we'll have a better picture. But my working theory is that they are cutting off the extreme right to allow them a better maneuver in the middle. And I don't know where they're negotiating, where they find the topic of negotiations on the table. It seems too early, but it does appear that they're trying to raise the bar to a new height and then try to trade it. All right. In this regard, let's start a polling in our chat. And today's question is, will Girkin get a real time in prison, or will he get just a slap on the wrist if it'll be a fake prosecution? We have 1,400 voted. Yes, he'll go to jail, 44%. No, he'll be released, 15%. And these are the games of Kremlin and FSB. There's some conspirology, 41%. So see, conspirology and going to jail are pretty competitive as theories. We have about 100,000 watching us, 40,000 click the like button. Please find it within yourself to click that like and share that stream with friends in your social media, anywhere you hang out. All right, let's perhaps discuss that news. We'll show the map, the satellite map that Washington Post published today. This is a satellite image of the village Cel, can be translated as target, goal, where private mercenary corps of Wagner is being headquartered now. And Ukrainian bodyguards also announced that Wagner's numbers grew up to 5,000 in Belarus, and they are also observing some armored vehicles there as well. So that's what Washington Post published. That all looks pretty strange, in my opinion. We can say that Wagner's history in Russia is pretty much done. There are no camps left, they closed Morkino and other places. There are no centers. That would be probably and properly recruiting. They don't have any armored, any warehouses. Everything was moved for whatever reason to Belarus. And our vision why Lukashenko would need that, it doesn't get answered yet. Because I'm still puzzled why they need all it. But regardless, concentration of Wagner troops still continues. You probably saw the video that Prigozhin released. I think he sanctioned the release of that, his statement and Utkin's statement, his second in command. How do you think, where is it going? Mark, it is part of that same ideation, I think. It started when Russia accused Poland to be ready to attack Belarus. Then they moved nukes to threaten Poland. Then yesterday Putin made a statement that the Polish eastern lands were given to Poland as a present from Russian Empire, and Russia has some interest in those territories. So I think he is raising the temperature in the room, he's raising the bar. Because also, if I would be trying to make situation difficult there, I would use their training exercise opportunity to mask some of the action, and you could bring some refugees to the border, create a threat to Poland, and then perhaps hit Lithuania. And we don't know if they will actually go with it, but they will try to escalate that scenario to create a negotiation field and then to discuss and de-escalate and trade it for some benefits. And this is a somewhat ideal situation for them, because if Wagner is attacking Lithuania or Poland, Russia can come out and say, well, we always prosecuted that group. They were going to attack Kremlin. They are incoherent, and we can help you pacify them, but it's kind of the mutual issue now that we don't control that group. But we can help you, and for that we need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 ammonia pipeline, sanctions, and all. So imagine that. Naval blockade of Ukraine, escalation on the front, on the eastern front, and at the same time provocations towards Poland, and perhaps an attack on Lithuania. You can't really attack Poland without losing it immediately, but they could probably attack Lithuania. And it could be provocations against the border guards, or would it be a proper march with armor and by foot? We don't know what they're preparing. And I think we should be prepared to all the eventualities, and the old planning principle advises to be prepared to the worst eventuality. This basically allows you to be ready for all the better ones. All right, let's discuss it from this angle. People are talking about Olexiy corridor that can be penetrated from Belarus to Kaliningrad region. It's about 90 kilometers. No, they'll get tired to walk these 90 kilometers under the aviation and infantry and ground attacks. It's much closer to march to Vilnius, which is 20 miles from the border. Bring it on the map, please. Mark, I've been there. I actually walked there with my own feet. No, Suwalki corridor is tough. 90 kilometers, and that terrain is suicide. Who do you think would be defending that area? Polish army. They have enough resource. What about Lithuania's army? Yeah, they can be defending it too, unless they're given problems someplace else. I think the real ideation is to distract Poles at some part of the border and then attack someplace else. If they understand anything in operative planning, you actually are prohibited to do an operation without creating a cover operation. So they should be doing some cover activity and then doing something that they actually plan to do. Alright, so Suwalki is basically on the map. You can see it between the red bottom right corner. If you draw a diagonal to Grodny, that's the direct line to Russian border. It's about 90 kilometers. And I don't know, how do you attack Vilnius? Well, how do you don't know? If you want to make a march to Vilnius, you just cross the border and go. Alright, what defends the border there in Lithuania? Well, I don't know. You should ask somebody from Lithuania what do they have defending the border. Do you think there are any NATO detachments there? Yes, they do have some NATO personnel, but if 5,000 Wagners decide to make a rush for it, it will be quite a handful, even for NATO deployed troops there. So I would treat that rather seriously as a probability. I think in Lithuania they're aware of that, right? But as far as I know, both Poles and Lithuanians, they look at this threat rather seriously. They even discussed it in the open on the NATO level. So we can wish them good luck in holding. But I would also say that, Ukrainian brigade may find themselves there after the beginning. Wait, for brigade to be there, that needs to be real fast deployment, right? Yeah, we can deploy pretty fast. And I'm hypothesizing, Mark. All right, let's do in orderly fashion. How soon can Ukrainian troops relocate to that area? Mark, this is beyond what needs to be discussed in public because it involves the actual time frame. Do you think they can get there in 24 hours? Well, let's imagine that, lay it out on the fantasy level. So if the war crosses into the NATO countries, then while NATO is getting their things together, Ukraine rather well can defend wherever we can reach, can defend our best allies. We have a lot of experience communicating with Wagner, very sad experience for Wagner troops. All right, we continue our polling. If Girkin will get the real jail time or will he be released? Yes, 40% no, 15%, 40 other percent are 41% considered to be games between Kremlin and FSB. All right, let's go to the war map. We'll bring the deep state map to the screen. Let's start with Svatovo-Kremenная part, or where? Yeah, we can start there. All right, let's. So, regardless of all the scary 100,000 troops and some motion alongside the front line, you can see how many red diamonds are on their side. They are not really moving well. First of all, it's because to the heroism of Ukrainian defenders who are stopping them, and second is due to the nature of that terrain, where you have to really work in small groups in order to even move anywhere. So all these thousands get split into small platoon-level detachments that fight against each other. So if you look at that, they have two main directions. From Svatovo, they go to Borovaya and Severn, and it could be to the north. So Svatovo is almost in the middle, a little to the top, diamond further beyond the front. They call it the group center. I think their group name nomenclature is west. For us, it's the center. So that's the upper part. And then the general direction towards Liman, which is at the bottom. You can see a lot of arrows here to that Serebranskaya forestry and Dibrova, and that's where they're doing undertaking a lot of efforts. They're sending paratroopers, they're sending their tank detachments. They have rather serious groups there looking at the potpourri that they aggregated. In some parts, they are really failing. They take maybe 500 yards and they get kicked back. So it's a mixed situation where they run at some height and then we kick them back and take it back. But this is not a successful action overall, where they actually press us and push us out of the line and change it to their favor. That is not quite working for them. They are using artillery, they are using jets, but they do not have enough success as they were planned to have by concentrating that many troops. Because they actually are, in artillery, they probably exceed us 10-1. Personnel is probably 5-1, as Russian side is claiming. And they were very hopeful for that they could push Ukrainian troops and get to the border of Lugansk region, and they'll understand whom they're dealing with and will get the upper hand in that fight. But it's failing as a plan. And the first several days of fighting showed that they will not have an easy walk in that area. I'm telling our troops are even managing to counterattack back. even though in some parts they did make a small motion. So that scary advance of 100,000 group turned into a complex fighting on a very difficult terrain. And we can also see in Telegram channels a lot of videos where they report them being hit with cassette-type munitions, and our troops are still standing. It's not easy, but we're holding, and I don't think, frankly, that our enemies will succeed in that area. Alright, let's continue down. Bakhmut is the next area of attention. Here we actually are advancing. You can see that we're advancing to the north and to the south. And at the bottom, Kurdyumovka and Klishivka, you can see more blue-colored areas. Some of the Russian tanks are posting that they're preparing defense near Andreevka. It's a bit lower from Bakhmut, and they're somewhat removed from the front line, but we'll see if they can manage defense to build up defense there. They're trying to push us out, and we're still advancing. We're still taking hundreds of yards, almost a kilometer a day. And let's go to Avdiivka. So they moved some of the troops locally from the upper part of a pincer to the lower part, and that's what their side is writing. It's not our news, it's Russian discussions. So they're posting that they brought some troops to that protrusion. You can see the arrow sticking out along the road. And we can see that this lower pincer goes pretty far. There's some attacks near Pervomayska, near the road. And of course, they're trying to repeat the same story as with Bakhmut. But I think it will not quite work there for them as well. I have the feeling. Then at Marinka, the fights are without any success. There's some heavy shelling, heavy fighting, and we're pacifying them rather successfully, even though it's a difficult situation there for both sides. Now, in Zaporozhye, near Staromayorska, the actions are happening, and we're not going to shed too much light on that. There is some motion. I'm trying to do no harm to our troops, but this is a very promising motion for us and not so pleasant for our enemies. They're trying to throw some reserves here, because if one imagines a further motion of Ukrainian troops, that's where we will already be attacking the defense line. The problem that they have is that they will not have enough people to defend the fortification line with the current dynamics, because they're losing them even before that. And if you go to Rabotino, that's another area where you can see the blue-colored area. So it's a slow motion. We basically take bits and pieces of the territory one after another, but we continue to push them out. And of course, there is fighting happening near Antonov Bridge. There were some videos of destroyed Russian equipment that is being burnt by our anti-tank groups. So overall, the trends are the same. There are no major changes in the situation. And we have several hotspots. It's Kupinska-Limanskaya direction in the northeast. There is a heavy fighting alongside that front line. The fights near Bakhmut, Avdiivka, Staromayorsk, and Rabotino. It doesn't mean there are no fights in other areas, but these are the hottest. These are the most active fights on both sides. All right, we got the picture from the map, thank you. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky is telling his Western allies that counteroffensive of Ukrainian troops is picking up steam, according to Financial Times, that in turn was referring to Zelensky's statement at the Security Council. And he's stating that Ukrainian military is approaching the fortification areas, and right now they're crossing the areas that were heavily covered with landmines. It takes time. And if you heard, Sullivan yesterday was making statements that indeed Ukrainian counteroffensive is connected with certain losses, with some problems related to landmines. So, what do you think about that speech in general? Well, today Americans made a statement that as soon as the main Ukrainian troops will be involved, the situation might change drastically in their favor, because they acknowledged that there is a significant part of our troops still not engaged, because the situation is still not fully in favor of engaging them. Because what we're doing, we're forming the conditions for that. This is what they call in NATO parlance forming operations. We are forming conditions for bringing in the major troops groups into the fight. When they will be brought, then of course, people will see a big difference. So our president delivered that thought in a manner that is very characteristic of him, to bring it to the wider audience, to help them understand it. This is what actually means we have not really started yet. All right. So this problem with landmines, do you think that seriously limits the capabilities of Ukrainian military? How can that be solved? Mark, there are different actions that can be taken to solve it. And it does limit our motion somewhat, but it cannot stop it. It can slow it, but it cannot stop it. And by the way, minefields, if they're not protected, they are being crossed, they're being walked through. Because specialists come, engineering troops come, and they clean the mines. So of course, somebody needs to cover that, right? Exactly. And then that's when the counter-battery game starts. If they have artillery covering the landmine field, we bring ours, and of course we start taking them out. It's not an easy process. We of course lose some troops and some equipment too, but we are losing that at a much smaller ratio than them, at least one of ours for 5 of theirs. And after the first motion, when you saw the videos and pictures of some of the armor getting blown in those minefields, we changed the approach, and we are doing a more tactical fights around each of those minefields. And we are solving a very difficult task, which I think only very few military in the world would be able to solve. Perhaps Americans would do that, and their Bradleys would be burning as much as ours do. One just needs to understand the minefield by itself is not really active. You can still cross it. The minefield works as long as you protect it, as long as it's covered. So that's when we start fighting with them, and when we essentially wear them out, and when we destroy the reserves that are protecting it, when they will be out of their depth defending the front line, that is when we will eventually break through the minefields, and you'll see an opportunity for us to bring in the main groups into the fight. And for them it would be much more difficult, because all these heroic defense lines and defense groups that they have now, they're suffering a lot of losses, and they already engaged their reserves. We still have not, and they have already torn those apart, and they're running out of them. And they also changed the rotation principle. They're not replacing and rotating their military groups in and out of the front line. They actually just bring fresh people in to fill in the empty spots in the personnel roster, because their groups are beaten up so much that they are afraid they'll lose it if they start to rotate in a proper way. So they're just refitting them out in the front, and this is a sign of a really bad situation. That means they lost or losing the ability to follow with a planned rotation of their troops, to withdraw them from the front line, to let them rest, and fill them with new personnel. That tells that their personnel, their resources, very low. And that means that we are progressing in accordance with our plan. I know this is a beaten up phrase and it's not easy, and it's not an easy plan, but we are progressing. All right, we have over 170,000 with us, 68,000 clicked the like button. Please continue sharing and clicking the like button. We are still continuing with our poll. If Girkin will get the real jail time, 45% saying yes, 15% saying no, 40% are saying this is the gameplay between FSB and Kremlin. All right, let's continue. Zelensky said that Crimean Bridge is a legit target that needs to be neutralized in the context of a grain deal and some development of the situation. I think several days passed since we discussed it last time. Your previous answer was nothing will be undertaken by international community in terms of grain deal and defending the cargo vessels in the Black Sea. So Putin came out with several requests in order to reinstate the grain deal, and he did mention the ammonia pipeline and getting SWIFT for his banks reinstated for some of them. And then one of the articles there that they propose is removal of limitations, and that's it. It's very vague. It's not even describing details. So I'm thinking my take on that is he is targeting sanctions at large. Well, Mark, let's follow everything in a step-by-step manner. Remember, there was an opinion that Erdogan will show Putin how to behave, and yeah, there was one, and he did. He basically said that he is not going to do anything at the moment. So one should remember, Erdogan always puts Turkey above anything else, and his politics, his external politics, are not always complementary to Ukraine. And I suspect Turkey's position is always like an Aikido fight with Putin, where they're looking for benefits for themselves. I think in general, Putin came out with the conditions, and there is no answer to these conditions. But there are also strikes by Russian side on our grain infrastructure. So even if when we sit down to negotiate at some point at the end of this war, we would not be able to reinstate our grain deal easy. It'll take us at least a year to rebuild all these things. So they're trying to use non-competitive means to achieve competitive advantages, which also might indicate their interest to some peace deal. Naval blockade is still not solved question. Our president posed a question today and suggested to bring the NATO Council today, because we do have a Ukraine and NATO Council, right? Because this is a real time problem that needs to be resolved and needs to be solved probably within this body authority. And the West, for now, is not showing any signs of being ready or preparing some answer. As always, they will likely negotiate for a long time and then will pick some answer at the end. And the signs that we can see right now is that a couple packages of help that are suggested and offered to us by United States and Germany, they are emphasizing, they're putting more stress on our air defense systems, and they'll be reinforcing them. And there are mentions of the transport and cargo areas, so they're giving more ammo to Gepards, they're giving more missiles to Patriot systems, so they'll be fortifying. But this is passive defense. You cannot win the war with passive defense measures, especially when they're shooting 10 Onyxes into one bridge. That's a pretty strong intensity. You need active measures. Shall we have active measures? I'm still concerned a bit. I'm not sure. I have my doubts. Definitely there'll be measures to hold and to stall Russia, but Russia will be trying to promote their position for negotiations to a highest degree, as we mentioned. They're threatening Poland, threatening Lithuania, not to create a third world war, but to create a better position for negotiations for themselves. That's exactly what it looks like. I think it's my good working hypothesis that that's what they're doing. I'm not saying this is the truth, but I'm saying this is very plausible logic. And there'll be some answer. We just need to wait from NATO to see what will float in the public discussion, how will NATO react to the naval blockade. Some countries already coming out with statements that this will provoke a food crisis and may cause deaths of millions of people. These statements are made on the United Nations level, so we'll see what will transpire. So you think there'll be no conditions for military escort to the cargo vessels going from Odessa and Nikolaev? I cannot say that under no circumstances. There could be some. For example, if Russians sink a vessel under the neutral flag, do you think that's possible? Under some conditions, yeah, that may happen. And then likely there'll be some military escort and certain ultimatums. But for now, this is just rhetoric on the level of threats. And Russian side paddled back a little and said, well, let's define the participation of vessels, what are they carrying. But their statement that they're considering all the vessels in the Black Sea to be alien Navy ships. So do you know how much activity is in the Black Sea right now? I would not know exactly, Mark, but I suspect there's very few vessels going, for example, to Russian ports because the grain deal is cancelled. So nobody is coming. And I think the traffic to Ukraine as well is going down. And situation is interesting. They announced a blockade to us, and at the same time, Russia has freedom to move their vessels as they like. So especially the cargo and trade vessels. So it's wrong. We should have enough means to retaliate in a similar fashion. And what means are you talking about? Missiles, the ones that would fly pretty far. And it would be nice to have them produced locally by our military industrial complex, but we probably can dedicate a separate story, a separate stream, or talk for another 15 or 30 minutes about that. I think people understand them. I would put it diplomatically, say some of our slowness in building our military capacity. So our president did arrange a meeting with the military and transportation leadership in our country to figure out an opportunity to continue the Green Deal by transporting it by other means. So we'll see. Also, Jack Sullivan came out and said that there are negotiations going between Biden and Zelensky about providing ATACMS missiles to Ukraine, and I think it might be connected to the grain deal and risks connected with the shelling of Ukrainian infrastructure. Do you think this escalation may lead to resolution of that question? Because ATACMS is an easy one, right? You just can load it and shoot. It would be nice, yeah, because in Crimea today there was a very good and big explosion of their munitions warehouse in Crimea, and it's continuing to blow up and still going on. There is oil storage, and they had to evacuate locals, and they had to block the motion on the Crimean bridge for different reasons. So there is something happening. ATACMS would definitely be able to add more bright pages to the history of that motion, and they would make their life more difficult in attempts to try to destroy Ukrainian infrastructure. Because passive position and air defense systems, it's a rather weak position. We also need active means to attack their targets. The targets of the country who is creating terror on the south of Ukraine and who is creating the naval blockade for Ukraine. So this would be then a strong argument to parry that blockade and to destroy some of their infrastructure, so they would think next time before announcing anything like that or hitting civilian targets. So I would also talk here with African countries, with the countries of Middle East, the ones that are consumers of our grain, because they might be able to provide additional pressure in the United Nations and other bodies, international bodies, because while other NATO countries are scratching their behinds, these countries can scream that, hey, we need to get things resolved because our lives do depend upon getting that food supply in time. And on a summit that Russia announced in St. Petersburg at the end of July, it'll be interesting to see how the leaders of African countries will react to limiting the grain deal, how the hosting party is actually leading or creating conditions for some of the African peoples to die from hunger. And by the way, there is still an order for Putin's arrest. And I think this all may play to escalate situation around Putin and his criminality in the world arena, because he is attacking the trade infrastructure here. And yeah, we cannot exclude that, Olexiy. So I think he brought up that International Criminal Court order as one of the arguments why he would not go to BRICS meeting, and it didn't fly. Africa basically told him that we cannot guarantee your safety here. We kind of have to follow the criminal proceedings. Right, because the person who endangers lives of millions of African people should not be flying around Africa, should not be just going to different meetings there. And one more topic I wanted to bring. There are some cassette-type munitions that are actively used now by Ukraine. And today, according to Russian publications, one of their so-called military correspondents was killed somewhere near Pitikhatki in the south, in Zaporozhye region. So I think it's one of the first swallows of that type munitions. How effective are these munitions? Mark, let's dispel the mythology around that type of munitions. They're not replacement for the usual shells. They're not several times more effective than usual shells. This is a very niche, special type of ammo that is designed to solve certain tasks on the battlefront. They do not replace the usual ones. And the usual shell is more effective to shoot at the usual target, and cassette types, they are more effective for other things. They are better in catching columns that are not armored or groups of soldiers. And on some videos you can see that we caught one of the columns that was not well protected, was not fully armored, and yeah, we caught some columns like that, and that's where the damage came from. But the fact that the number of videos that are confirming the successful use of that munition is good, and it will not change the situation on the war like HIMARS changed, but it is a good and effective instrument. We already see that, and the Russian side has been using them since the beginning of this conflict, and we're just starting. Yeah, there is a lot of squealing on their side right now. Well, yes, because it's getting more difficult for them to group and to supply, because to bring a column now to resupply their troops, now you're risking an attack, now you're risking a shelling by these munitions. And we're doing everything to continue these problems for them, to make sure they grow. All right, they're also saying that Borodai, who is now Congressman in Russia, who was riding in one of the vehicles near Bakhmut. His vehicle was shot at by a Ukrainian tank, and 2 officers were wounded. He was not. So, yeah. One more topic for today. American intel confirmed that tactical nukes are indeed in Belarus. They're already placed. So this is not a mythology anymore. Indeed, they have it. And I think they're getting the information from satellite imagery and probably some intel on the ground. So all that, I think, is adding to Wagner, as you said, and Putin's statement that, hey, Stalin gave you some territories to Poland back in the day, so you may consider that we have some questions about it. So what do you think, Olexiy, they want to achieve at the end? You said negotiations? They want to create new negotiations, new platform for pressure for that? Yeah, that's exactly what they're doing. And I think collective West is now facing that pressure, and they need to define their way how to counter all these escalations by Putin, and perhaps he can come up with more nasty things and threaten Zaporozhye nuclear power plant and destroying more grain infrastructure. So all of these actions, you can see that drumming this up, definitely they're going to negotiate, and they're trying to pump it up, the whole situation, and to force West to start talking to them on many questions. I think that's my best working theory I have for now. All right. So now at the very end of the stream, there were some questions. We will not be naming people, but there were a lot of questions about situation in Odessa, about military recruitment offices, and now there is information in the news in Ukraine that National Anti-Corruption Agency came out and said that the leaders and the directors of military recruitment organizations will be checked. Yeah, and it's interesting. Speaking of that Odessa recruitment director, there are some jokes that, well, he actually is missing after that statement, and there are some jokes in Ukraine here that he may have run to fight in Bakhmut, but these are just jokes. So you think you guys can actually solve quite a bit of that corruption things that are being brought up? Because it's rather painful when they're being brought. Mark, this is what we call old system in Ukraine that is sucking on the body of Ukraine like an old enemy, like a very multi-tentacle structure that is sucking the juices out of the country. And it's one of, I would say that it's even more dangerous than our Russian foes right now. And we need to use that opportunity to finish it. And it's a hydra with 1,000 faces. It can be local recruitments, local businessmen, local administrations who are spending millions for some city pavements and enhancements instead of spending that money on the drones and military equipment. And one needs to win it. We need to win it. Hey, I have a recipe for Ukraine. Send everybody to the front. Send all of them to the front. Those tax, administration, and recruitment people who are violating the corruption laws, just send them. We need them on the front, right? Perhaps they are indeed patriots as they portray themselves. Send them to fight. Am I wrong? They're all citizens of Ukraine. They should fight for the country. I will not argue here, Mark, but I would say the system has 1,000 faces. And actually, even on the front, there are some elements of that. And the supplies that we're dealing with, and corruption has many faces, and we need to finish it everywhere we see it. We need to pick on that scab and finish it, and I hope I sincerely hope we'll finish with it. We'll be done with it. All right, about 170 plus thousands are with us. 80,000 clicked the like button. 61,000 voted in our today's poll. If Girkin will get the real jail time, or will he get a conditional parole? So 15% think he will be let go, 40% think he'll be put in jail, and the rest are thinking these are the games between Kremlin and FSB, Lubyanka. So two viable theories, that he might go to jail, or that indeed is a gameplay between two Kremlin towers. We will see Olexiy on Monday, 10 p.m., right? Tomorrow I'll have a different stream, different guest on my channel with Stanislav Belkovsky. He is going to be for the first time on my channel. and we'll talk about more topics related to Kremlin, Wagner, Girkin, etc. Should be interesting. All right, Olexiy, thank you very much, and we'll stay connected. We'll see you Monday. Okay, good luck.